With the original Pro Power Elongated being sunset later this year, Gearbox needed another 14mm power paddle to fill its void. Enter the Gearbox Pro Ultimate Power Elongated. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So this is a paddle I was really excited to get my hands on. I love the original Pro Power Elongated, and I also really like the Pro Ultimate, but I do tend to prefer thinner spring effect paddles. So this was the Gearbox paddle I thought I was going to like the most when it came out. I also just generally play well with Gearbox paddles. My first paddle ever was actually the Joey Farias Pro model, which I do still play with once in a while. It's obviously very outdated now, but that was one of the first paddles that made me feel like I could use my natural tennis technique in pickleball. Edgeless Gearbox paddles have always been super responsive to player input, like a tennis racket, and their Pro Power paddles were actually the first spring effect paddles I played with, and I couldn't believe how well they performed. The power was obviously top notch, but as I've raved about many times, it was really the feel in their spin that unlocked this whole new potential for shot selection in pickleball. Spring effect paddles kind of raised the playability ceiling. Basically, because of their combination of dwell time and spring effect, they almost allow you to do more to a pickleball because they amplify everything. Now, while all spring effect paddles are like that, at this point we've got quite a few of them, so you can actually narrow down your search based off of specific criteria, which wasn't always possible when there were just one or two. More muted, more feel, bigger sweet spot, more aerodynamic. There's a bit of everything now within the spring effect style, kind of like when thermoform paddles became more mainstream. In this video, I'm going to try and explain why you might want to go for this paddle over, say, something like the 16mm Pro Ultimate, or really any of the other spring effect paddles. Because I haven't actually talked about the Pro Ultimate on this channel yet, this is going to be more of a comparison between these two, but I will spend a lot more time talking about the new Ultimate Power because it is newer. This is the one people want to know more about. Now, before we go on, I do just want to remind you, as usual, that any of the paddles we talk about on this channel you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comments section what you want me to cover next. So let's talk specs. These two paddles are virtually identical except for, of course, core thickness. The Pro Ultimate is 16mm thick. The Pro Ultimate Power is 14mm thick. Otherwise, they're both 16.5 inches long with a 5.5 inch handle. They weigh 8 ounces with a T700 carbon top sheet and the same SST core. Unfortunately, I don't have swing weight specs on these paddles. We still don't have a way of testing that because our machine doesn't read the right numbers. But what I can say is that they're both very high. Definitely in the upper echelons of paddles for stock swing weight, which does bring up an important playability characteristic in terms of hand speed, which I'll talk more about later. Now, the major difference between these paddles and the Pro Power Elongated is their top sheet and core construction. This one's obviously also thicker. Gearbox changed the carbon layup to make it softer, and they also tweaked certain properties of the foam to make for a more plush feel with more vibration dampening. I'll tell you right now, there is a very big difference in feel between these and the Pro Power Elongated, and also a big difference in feel between the Pro Ultimate and the Pro Ultimate Power, so let's get into that. The core differences between these paddles and the Pro Power Elongated is how they interact with the ball, and that's where a lot of the differences in terms of power, spin, and control stem from. I'm going to start with the 14mm Ultimate Power because it's the same core thickness as the Power Elongated. This paddle is significantly more muted than that one was. You don't feel the ball all the way through that contact point here nearly as much. Even the sound isn't quite as sharp. Personally, that's not something I like very much, especially with these spring effect paddles, because one of the major benefits you get to playing with a spring effect paddle is incredible feel. Compared to the Yola Pro 4s, this is very different. Those paddles I describe as more juicy. Basically, you feel that springiness all the way through the contact. This is a lot more dull. I know some people like a more muted feel because they associate it with higher control, and to a certain extent that's true, but I'll talk more about this in the control section. Control isn't great on these spring effect paddles, and actually feeling what the ball is doing during dwell time is kind of important to at least give you a sensation of control. So this is more muted than the Pro Powers and the Yola Pro 4s, and compared to the thicker Ultimate, there's a similarly muted feel here, but the dwell time is much longer. It's definitely still not the most connected spring effect paddle, but a longer dwell time does give you more time to feel the ball, so I am more connected to the ball here. The other small issue I have with the Pro Ultimate Power is that the sweet spot is quite small. Now, this is relative to other spring effect paddles. These paddles have larger than average sweet spots, but this is the smallest one I've tested since those Pro Powers. There's a noticeable drop off in performance between perfect contact and contact off center, and while I'm not usually too fussy about sweet spot size, I have to say, usually when a paddle is muted, at least it has a pretty big sweet spot. Muted with a small sweet spot means that 1, you're not rewarded for making good contact, and 2, you don't get that added forgiving safety blanket that usually comes from a muted feel. So it's a bit of a lose-lose. Again, it's not a small sweet spot, but definitely a little smaller than the rest of the spring effect competition, and also a lot smaller than the 16mm Ultimate. This actually has quite a large sweet spot, even compared to other spring effect power paddles, which is impressive considering it doesn't have an edge guard. Mind you, this one is more broken in than the Pro Ultimate Power, so that could play a part as well. Now you might be thinking, smaller sweet spot, just add some lead to the sides and you'll make it a lot bigger, but remember, the swing weight's already quite high here. You can add a little bit, but too much and you'll be bringing it into a weight category that I would describe as pretty unmanageable, so just be careful with that. I also definitely wouldn't add any weight to the Pro Ultimate. This is one of the clunkiest paddles I've tested in quite a while. In fact, if hand speed is of any concern, I would probably just stay away. Despite also having a high swing weight, the Ultimate Power is much more maneuverable. It's thinner, so more aerodynamic, and you feel that all around the court, not just for quick reactions up at the net. Now let's move on to control. I actually wanted to talk about control before I got into power, because how these paddles perform in the control game has a lot to do with what I was just talking about in terms of feel and sweet spot size. Obviously, spring effect paddles are not inherently great for control. Every time they make contact with the ball, they add power to it instead of taking away from it. That's the big difference between a spring effect and a more standard cushioning effect. That's true of all these paddles, including the Pro Ultimate and the Pro Ultimate Power, but that's a standard that most people are aware of with these paddles. To me, the Pro Ultimate Power is even a notch under most of the others. The key for that is feel. Spring adds power, but it also adds feel, so you're more connected to the ball, meaning that contact point gives you more feedback as to what the ball is going to do when it leaves the paddle face. Eliminate some of that feedback, and the way the ball leaves the paddle face could surprise you a little bit more. On super cushion paddles that are muted, that's not an issue, because the cushioning makes them inherently controlled. But on this paddle, where you need to be extremely precise with your motion, that feel is crucial for control, and I just don't have it here. I never got to a point where I was super confident the ball would go exactly where I told it to every single time with this paddle, and that is a sensation I have on some other spring effect paddles. Despite their lack of inherent control, I'm still confident with them, and at the end of the day, confidence is by far the most important part of the control game. Because I'm not confident with this paddle for touch shots, I don't think I'd ever be able to use it as my main, but do keep in mind that's more of a personal preference thing. A lot of players like a more muted feel, and while I do think muted is more risky with these high spring effect paddles, if you do want that, then this might actually be better for you. Now, compared to the Pro Ultimate, like I said, this is quite a muted paddle, but it has a much longer dwell time, and while that dwell time does add a spring effect, you still have that extra time to control the ball. For going back to that word confidence, I felt much more confident controlling this paddle because I had a split second longer to guide the ball. So this is a better control paddle overall. And by the way, for me, it's not always been the case that the thicker version of a spring effect paddle is better for control. Some of the thinner ones have such a connected and responsive feel that I actually prefer their shorter dwell time. I also find the Pro Ultimate Power to be a little bit inconsistent in the control game because of its smaller sweet spot. There's a big difference in how far the ball goes when you make contact here versus here, and that's inherently a problem for control because you're not going to be making perfect contact every time. So it's definitely not the best control paddle. The Pro Ultimate is much better in that regard, and most other spring effect paddles are as well, at least if you put a lot of value on good feel. But now let's talk about power, because that is fantastic here. Power is top tier on both the Pro Ultimate Power and the standard Pro Ultimate. They both have huge top end power. In fact, I really can't say which one has more. The 16mm Ultimate does seem to have a tiny bit more spring effect when you go for big shots, but that's not to say the 14mm Ultimate Power is lacking in any way. The major difference in power on full strokes between these two is going to come with how you access that power. The Pro Ultimate packs more mass behind the ball, which creates more plow through and more power that way. The Pro Ultimate Power is much easier to generate paddle head speed with, so you can just swing faster, and that's another way to create power. Now, power on both these paddles is slightly lower than it was on the Pro Power Elongated, but that's to be expected. That paddle was illegally powerful. The more muted feel here does tone it down a little bit, but but that's honestly a good thing. I said this in the top 5 power paddles video. If you play with these and find that you need more power, then you've just gotten a little too conditioned to paddles that are too powerful. And because those won't be legal anymore, it's probably best to get used to these ever so slightly lower power levels. Pop is where there's a much bigger difference between the Pro Ultimate and the Pro Ultimate Power, and as you would expect, the thinner one is better. That's for 2 reasons. One, it has a shorter dwell time, so on more compact strokes, the ball is in and out of the paddle face a little bit quicker, which redirects pace more efficiently. And 2, it's more maneuverable, so it's easier to generate pop out of nowhere. Even compared to other 14mm spring effect paddles, because this doesn't have an edge guard, it naturally feels a little bit more aero. So while it does have quite a high swing weight, it's always going to have a small edge in hand speed. Really, there's not much more to say about power, at least until this paddle breaks in fully. The main thing is that it's lower than the Pro Powers, higher pop than the Pro Ultimate and most other paddles on the market, and top end power that's on par with pretty much everything else. This is a wonderful power paddle, which certainly makes up for its deficiencies in control. If you're a ball basher, you'll like that more instantaneous pop here, and you'll definitely be defaulting more towards power shots than control shots. As with all spring effect paddles, spin is excellent on both the Pro Ultimate and the Pro Ultimate Power, but kind of like it was for control, spin variety is a little bit different between the two. Thin spring effect paddles like this produce a ton of spin because they're thin, so they transfer spin very efficiently from your technique into the ball, and that trampoline effect also amplifies spin. This is pretty much exactly what you want on big powerful ground strokes, and compared to thicker paddles like the Pro Ultimate that have a longer dwell time, you feel like that transfer of spin is a little bit more instantaneous. On slower spin shots where you're not hitting one fast uniform stroke and you're going with a little bit more finesse, this isn't quite as effective. That's where that longer dwell time of something thicker comes in really handy to grab onto the ball and give you a bit more purchase. There is a pretty significant difference between these two paddles in the soft spin game, to the point where I wasn't really hitting soft spin shots with the Pro Ultimate Power because I knew how much easier they were with something else. Of course, the Pro Ultimate isn't the best paddle for the soft spin game because it is clunky, so it's hard to generate that whipping motion, but it is better and it's more comparable to 16mm Yola paddles. This Pro Ultimate Power is more like the Spartus Olympus in the soft spin game, like I talked about last week. These firmer power paddles don't really give you enough time and purchase over the ball to shape it when you're not swinging full. Because it has a better soft spin game and a better soft control game, I do think the Pro Ultimate is overall a more well-rounded paddle than the Pro Ultimate Power. But now let's talk about who these two paddles are made for. First of all, I think the Pro Ultimate is one of the best performing paddles on the market right now. It's elite in almost every domain, except for maneuverability, where to be fair, it's one of the worst. If you're an advanced player wanting a spring effect paddle with great all-around performance, this should be at the top of your list, except if you prioritize hand speed. Like seriously, this is not fast at all. This paddle has also broken in really nicely. It definitely hasn't gotten too hot, but the dwell time is longer, so you actually get better control and spin potential without that added risk of pop-ups. The Pro Ultimate Power is definitely a little bit more niche. It's extremely poppy with tons of top-end power, but if you want any help in the soft game, then this definitely isn't going to be for you. This is one of the most punishing power paddles right now, and obviously power paddles are already extremely punishing, so you can imagine not much soft game at all. This is for those of you who play with all-out power. Now, to be fair, I haven't broken this paddle into the point where I have the Pro Ultimate right now, but I don't see this ever developing that same dwell time just because it is thinner. I'm sure it'll soften up a little bit, but it'll never get to a point where it's competitive in the soft game, which to be fair is totally fine. You're not buying a power paddle for the soft game, but it is always nice to have a little bit of it. With that said, that is going to be the end of this review. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you want to demo either of these two paddles, you can come visit us in store, or if you want to buy them, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.